Despite being full of memorable events, 2022 wasn't the best of years for some teams. Many clubs' market value drops due to a number of reasons. For some teams, poor performance was the key, while other clubs had to part ways with their best players. Today, we'd like to tell you about 10 teams that lost in market value the most in 2022. But before we start, we'd like you to take part in our mini quiz. Which one of these 3 teams has the most expensive squad? Inter, RB Leipzig, Napoli? Leave your answers in the comments and get ready for watching. Stuttgart, minus 62 million euros. The Swabians' first season after they got back to the Bundesliga was a decent one, as they managed to finish mid-table. The season 21-22, however, was way more of a challenge, and Stuttgart barely avoided relegation. The lack of prospects made it really hard for Stuttgart to keep their leaders at the club. The financial problems is yet another thing that makes the club sell players in order to stay afloat. Sasha Kalajic, the top scorer, left the club last summer for 18 million euros, though his market value was 25 million at that moment. The same with another young talent, Orel Mangala, who moved to Nottingham Forest for 13 million euros, while being worth more than that. However, the Swabians managed to get out of a most difficult situation with the help of new signings, many of which were loanees. Konstantinos Mavropanos, who came from Arsenal for only 3 million euros, was a real bargain, as his market value was 15 million. But even though Stuttgart has successfully overcome financial difficulties, the team is still on the verge of going down. So the combination of poor performance and selling leaders is why Stuttgart is number 10 in our list. Shakhtar Donetsk, minus 63 million euros. Shakhtar's financial situation has been a grave one recently, and the team's market value has decreased by more than a third. The club was once famous for its scouting, finding talents in Brazil and bringing them to the club. But once the war started, many of them decided to leave Shakhtar. In fact, all the internationals that were the key to the club's success both in Ukraine and in Europe changed clubs. Just look at this list of names. David Neres, worth 20 million, joined Benfica for 15 million. Dodo, worth the same 20 million, moved to Fiorentina for 14 million. Marcos Antonio left for Lazio, while Fernando moved to Austria to play for RB Salzburg. And there are more. There were many other players who moved out on loan. Tete joined Lyon, Manor Solomon was signed by Fulham, Pedrinho went on loan to Atletico Mineiro, and Marlon moved to Monza. 7 more players left the club because their contract expired, among them Serhii Bolbat. New players were signed, but it's not like the newcomers such as Zubkov and Petrak can replace those who left the club. Shakhtar lost more than 63 million of its market value in 2022, and it could have been more of it were not for Mykhailo Mudryk making significant progress. His market value rose from 4 million to 40, and shortly after the new year, he was signed by Chelsea for as much as 100 million euros. We'll see if Shakhtar is going to spend them wisely and get a proper replacement. Juventus, minus 67 million euros. With Max Allegri back in business, Juventus had to rebuild its squad and get rid of the deadwood. A number of big signings were made in January 2022. Dusan Vlahovic moved from Fiorentina for 82 million euros, and Denis Zakaria also joined Juve that winter. Meanwhile, some players had to go. That was Rodrigo Bentancur, while Kulusevski and Ramsey were loaned out. And yet, much more was to be done in order to cover the expenses. Thus, many transfer departures took place last summer. Matthijs de Ligt, one of the most valuable defenders in the world, left for Bayern for 67 million, while Demiral, another centre-back, was signed by Atalanta for 20 million. Bernardeschi and Dybala, worth 45 million in total, also left the club as their contract expired, and apart from them, there were Douglas Costa, Giorgio Chiellini and Luca Pellegrini, who left as free agents as well. As for the loans, Zakaria moved to Chelsea, while Arthur Melo was loaned out to Liverpool. At the same time, some decent replacements were signed. Di Maria, Pogba and Paredes joined Juve as free agents. Bremer was signed for 41 million, Kostic for 13 million, and Chiesa was at last signed on a permanent basis for 42 million. The US squad underwent some serious changes, though it's hard to tell if it actually became stronger. The results, however, are yet to come, so many players' value decreased, and that is the reason why the whole team dropped in price this much. Wolfsburg, minus 71 million euros. After Wolfsburg had managed to prove themselves worthy and qualified for the Champions League in 2021, the following season ended up being a disaster, as the Wolves finished not far from the relegation zone. Xaver Schlager, the key player, was sold to RB Leipzig for 12 million euros, despite being worth 27 million. Kevin Mbabu, worth 9 million, joined Fulham for 5 million. Esther Ranks, the rising star, went to Milan on loan. John Brooks moved to Benfica, but didn't bring a penny to Wolfsburg, as he joined the Portuguese club as a free agent after his contract ran out. After so many transfer departures, Wolfsburg had to buy players. Jakub Kaminski came from Lech for 10 million euros. Matthias Swanberg, another midfielder, was signed from Bologna for 9 million, and Bartol Franjic from Dinamo Zagreb cost about 8 million. We may say that Wolfsburg slightly overpaid for all of them, as the players weren't too eager to join a team that is struggling. As a result, the team's market value decreased by almost 30%, and the reason for that wasn't the transfers, but rather the club's bad results. Even the young players dropped in price a bit, not to mention the 30-year-old ones. And the team's unsuccessful season was yet another reason for the team's market value to suffer a 71 million decrease. Atalanta, minus 73 million euros. Gasperini's Atalanta was one of the biggest discoveries in European football, renowned for their eye-catching attacking football, as well as the Champions League performance. But last season, Atalanta's results got way worse. 8th place in Serie A, and as a result, no European cups. Last summer, Atalanta's squad underwent massive changes. Cristian Romero was bought out by Tottenham, Remo Freuler left for Nottingham Forest, and Matteo Lovato joined Salernitana. Apart from them, more than 10 players left for free after their contracts expired, but that wasn't the reason the team's value dropped either. After all, there were new signings as well. Jeremy Boga, who cost 22 million, Ederson, who joined Atalanta for 21 million, Demiral, 20 million, and Rasmus Højlund, 17. Thus, Atalanta's spendings exceeded the club's earnings by 17 million. So what about the rest of the sum? More than 50 million. But as we've already mentioned, the club's results were the main thing that caused the players' value to decrease. Among them, the leaders, such as Pasalic and Demiral, Zapata and Malinovsky, were both worth 30 million in January 2022. Now they are worth only 18. Muriel's value, which was 22 million last winter, has dropped by 10 million since then. And Darun is now worth 8 million less than he used to. Atalanta's story is what shows that it's a team's performance that determines its footballer's value and not vice versa. Dear friends, before we go on, we'd like to ask you to help us gain 1,000 subscribers. If you like our content, leave a like, subscribe, and don't forget to press the bell button so that you don't miss our next video. Leicester, minus 87 million euros. Leicester's results under Brendan Rodgers were more than impressive. Despite not having the best of squads, the Foxes were battling for the Champions League spots and established themselves as a top 6 side. But last season was when it all changed. Unlike many other Premier League clubs, Leicester had no intention of making any notable signings at first, but Wesley Fofana's move to Chelsea for 80 million euros made Leicester start looking for their best centre-back's possible replacement. So the Belgian defender Wout Faes was signed for 18 million. Kasper Schmeichel was another notable player who left the club that summer. The one to replace him was the 32-year-old keeper Alex Smithers. All in all, Leicester earned about 65 million euros, but still lost in its market value as there were too many unsolved problems with the squad. The team's mediocre football, as well as the lack of results, caused the biggest star Tielemans to drop in price by 15 million, while Ndidi lost 20 million of his market value. Soyuncu, who became a man because of his countless mistakes in defense, lost half of his former value, as it dropped from 45 to 22 million. Those who were the team's core not so long ago also got cheaper, mostly because of their age. Yannick Westergaard's value dropped from 15 to 7 million. Ayoze Perez, worth 15 a year ago, is now worth 5. Evans was worth 5 million, now it's 3. And Bertrand's value dropped from 5 to 1 million. Leicester is currently 11th in the Premier League in terms of footballers' median age, which is why all the team's value dropped this much. And not to forget Fofana, who was worth 40 million at the moment he changed clubs. Lille, minus 95 million euros. In 2021, Lille managed to achieve unbelievable results. A long-awaited Ligue 1 title was won for the first time in 10 years. After that, however, the team began to struggle as the head coach Gaultier left, so there was only a mid-table finish for them last season. Such a rapid change was caused by a great number of players leaving Lille. Sven Botman, one of the leading Ligue 1 defenders, moved to Newcastle for 37 million euros last summer. Amadou Onana joined Everton for 35 million. These two brought Lille some decent money, as they were sold for the sum that exceeded their overall market value by 32 million. Renato Sanchez left for PSG, while Zeki Çelik was signed by Roma for only 7 million, despite being worth almost 20 million. As we may see, Lille got almost 100 million euros from selling players, but the club's board had no intention of spending them on incoming transfers. The only decent signing was Mohamed Bayo, who cost Lille 14 million. The team's below-par results were the reason many players' market value dropped. Even Jonathan Davis, the young talent, lost 5 million of his former market value. Lille's squad, however, is relatively young, so even if some players decrease in market value, it's usually not that significant. And though Lille had enough money to get solid replacements for their former players, the board decided not to spend them, and as a result, it all went downhill for the 2021 Ligue 1 champions. Atletico Madrid, minus 120 million euros. After a triumphant La Liga winning 2021 season, Diego Simeone's Atletico had to face a lot of problems. The team's defense, once rock solid, fell apart, and Athletic just barely finished third in the following season. The colossal 120 million decrease has nothing to do with the club's transfer policy, in fact. Xime Versalco and Hector Herrera became free agents. Lodi went on a one-year loan to Nottingham, but instead of them, Nael Molina was signed and Sergio Reguilon was brought in on loan. The club's spendings were really insignificant, so there was another reason why the squad's value lowered this much. The first thing we must mention is having one of the oldest squads in La Liga. There's only one team with a high median age, that is Betis. The Atletico players are 28.4 years old on average, so no wonder their squad's value is going down. Jan Oblak, who was worth 60 million a year ago, is now worth 40. Jimenez's market value dropped by 10 million, Llorente and Griezmann's by 25 million. Carrasco, Morata, Felix and Lemar now worth 10 million less each. Koke's market value had a 22 million decrease. Saul is now worth 20 million less than last winter. Savic lost 11 million and Felipe 5. So almost all of the players' values dropped, and the two main reasons for that were their age and the team's results. Manchester United, minus 135 million euros. The 21-22 season was one to forget for Manchester United, as the Red Devils barely made it into the Europa League. The new head coach, Erik ten Hag, did make things better at last after the club's bleak spell with Ralf Rangnick in charge. Last summer was when the United squad underwent a lot of changes. Tahith Chong and Anders Pereira were sold, though for only 11 million in total, while such players as Eric Bailly, Alex Telles, Amad Diallo and Dean Henderson were loaned out. There were also a bunch of players who left United as free agents. Nemanja Matic, Edinson Cavani, Paul Pogba, Jesse Lingard and Juan Mata worth 75 million euros combined. Another important thing is a great number of new signings. Eriksen, Malacia, Casemiro, Anthony and Lisandro Martinez joined Manchester United. More than 200 million euros were spent on the newcomers, while there were only 13 earned from selling players. But even such spendings were not enough to prevent the team's market value from going down. Bruno Fernandes lost 15 million of his value, Sancho and Varane lost 25 each, while Rashford lost 30 million. Maguire 18, Luke Shaw 14, Van de Beek 5, Wan-Bissaka 20 million, Martial 17 million, and Lindelof is now worth 9 million less than he used to. The team's football used to be really disappointing, as the team was constantly losing the weaker sides. The situation, however, has improved lately, and now Man United seems to be about to bounce back at last. Sevilla, minus 170 million euros. It's hard to believe that Sevilla's market value dropped by almost 50% in just 1 year, but that's what actually happened. And that is a team which is consistently playing in Europe. Two biggest players were sold last summer and were sold for less money than they were worth. Jules Koundé moved to Barca for 50 million, and Diego Carlos was sold to Aston Villa for 31 million. Lucas Ocampos was loaned to Ajax, while Luuk de Jong and Alejandro Pozo were sold to PSV and Almeria respectively. The sellings led Sevilla earned 92 million euros, while the club spent only 28 of them. Tanguy Nianzou came from Bayern for 16 million and Marcao for 12. Januzaj and Isco were signed as free agents, though Isco's contract has already been terminated by the club. Apart from the above-mentioned players, Kasper Dolberg, Alex Telles and Bade joined Sevilla on loan, but nevertheless the team's results did the trick, as well as the players' age. Sevilla's squad is not much younger than one of Atletico Madrid, and too many of the players are about to hang up their boots. En-Nesyri, worth 40 million a year ago, is now worth only 15. Lamella's market value dropped from 20 to 14 million. Jesus Corona lost 8 million, Suso 9 million, Rakitic 3 million, and Delaney's market value decreased by 5 million euros. So there's a combination of things that affected Sevilla's market value this much: the leading players changing clubs and the lack of transfer signings. And of course the age, as many players who once were essential to the club are now way past their prime. Dear friends, which of these clubs was the biggest disappointment for you in 2022? Please let us know in the comments. We would like you to share your thoughts with us. See you soon.